order. Today is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. And first order of business is determination whether we have a quorum. Ms. Jones, if you could take the roll.
Commissioner Draper?
Here.
Commissioner Halleck?
You're currently muted, Commissioner Halleck.
Oh,
Here.
Commissioner Hugo?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson? And Chair Isaac?
here. All right, having 4 of the 5 commissioners that are currently seated present, we do have a quorum. Since we are conducting this meeting via Zoom electronically or by phone, we need a motion and approval by the board to suspend the rules and conduct this meeting through Zoom. Do I hear a motion?
I move to suspend the rules and conduct the meeting by Zoom, through Zoom.
Okay, Commissioner Halleck, his motion. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, then Ms. Jones, do we have to conduct all votes through a roll call, including at least procedural? Okay, you're on mute, but yes, she's going to call the roll, and any vote we take tonight, we're going to do it by roll call.
Commissioner Draper?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Chair Isaac?
Yes. All right, the motion passes. We'll move on to approval of the minutes of May 13th, 2020. Are there any comments or discussions with respect to the proposed meeting minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes of May 13th, 2020?
I move to approve the minutes from the May 13th meeting.
Okay, Commissioner Hugo. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Halleck seconds. Ms. Jones?
Commissioner Draper?
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Chair Isaac?
Yes. All right, the next item on the agenda is a discussion with respect to accessory dwelling units and potential modifications to the zoning ordinance. Just to be clear, tonight's meeting with respect to this item is solely for discussion purposes. We will not be taking any action tonight with respect to the ADUs in the zoning ordinance. Mr. Mangum or Ms. Jones, are you going to be presenting this item for discussion?
I can give it just a brief overview.
Please.
So this is a discussion item for accessory dwelling units. This is a building type that's been around in Evanston for much of its history, known as coach houses. While it's been present in our zoning ordinance, there have been recent changes within the last 2 years. In 2018, there was a change to the definition, primarily to clarify that coach houses may be rented out to non-family members. Then earlier this year, the City Council approved additional changes to coach house regulations, formalizing them even more, allowing them as expanding the definition that the coach house includes a garage, that one coach house is allowed per zoning lot. Additionally, additional height was allowed in certain circumstances where additional setbacks would be provided. There's clarification about them being permitted accessory structures in the side and rear yards, in residential and non-residential zoning districts. Additionally, as mentioned, the setbacks and height and regulations for outside historic districts, and then a change to the parking regulations for coach houses, so that parking is not required within certain proximity, 1,500 feet of the transit stop, or if the coach house were to be restricted to being affordable for 10 years. That's kind of quickly where we've been. We do have a more recent referral from the City Council to develop a more comprehensive set of ADU regulations. So there's a description of all these items within your packet, but we did just go through and show on this slide the additional items for clarification. So creating a new definition for accessory dwelling unit, and that accessory dwelling unit may be not only detached as the coach house has been historically in Evanston, but also may be attached or internal. So for example, within a basement or within an attic, someone could create an accessory dwelling unit. And several other criteria as far as construction, kind of when it can be created, number of units, one on the lot. And the items here that are bolded are items that we're seeking even more input from the commission on, that we've discussed a little bit as staff and internally, and are seeking more consensus on those items. So that's just kind of a summary of where we are, and we can come back to these maybe following public comment as we get discussion from the commission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mangum. Since we're not going to be taking any, action, it probably makes sense to hear from the public before we begin our discussion on the matter. I think it'll inform our discussion. Mr. Mangum or Ms. Jones, who has the sign-up sheet? Ms. Jones, you're muted.
Okay. We've got 4 people who were signed up. The first of which was Tracy Foles Gentle. I'm not sure if she's on the call though.
Okay, doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it. Okay. The next person was Dick Coe from Evanston Development Cooperative.
Mr. Coe?
Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, commissioners, and thank you for giving us a few minutes. My name is Dick Coe. I live on the 2400 block of Hartree here in Evanston. As you know, I'm the president of the Evanston Development Cooperative. And really, I wanted to state that we are very grateful for the innovative package or the documents that are in front of us. So we want to really commend city staff for putting that together. We're very much in support of the internal and attached ADUs. And I just wanted to reflect on the last few months in the community. ADUs do matter. We hear from more than 100 homeowners that these accessory dwelling units, they really are a creative way to address the cost of housing at Evanston. They also take sustainability out of the individual dwelling unit and into the community as we think about the gentle density that all types of ADUs offer. So we see that in the community. And we also hear from homeowners, especially during COVID-19, during this pandemic, that the extra space allows them to bring in or they want to have one to bring in an elderly parent, or they themselves want to downsize and to stay in the community, and other family needs, from adult children moving home to more home office space. So we see ADUs really being a critical piece. And specifically in the discussion points today, we do want to state a few things that we think are based on what we're hearing from homeowners and our experience in Evanston. The first is the maximum ADU size. We see the detached unit really being fairly well regulated per zoning. We don't see a huge need for a maximum size for the detached ADU. For the internal ADU, we would like to propose something around 1,000 square feet that gives us ample opportunity to house, provide housing for a small family. And what we think is also particularly innovative in the packet is not considering off-street parking space that's open air, so outside of a building, to not be counted towards the building lot coverage. We see that as a great opportunity to have more ADA accessible coach houses and ADUs in the community, so that 200 square feet per parking space can be used towards housing. And we have seen dozens of homeowners who are interested in accessible units to stay in the community or to provide accessible housing for loved ones. And lastly, the ADU height, we see a reason to be equitable, to really balance out and to even out, I should say, between the historic district and outside. We see, just from the cost of construction, from dormers, roofs to other concerns, that 20 feet for a flat roof and 25 feet for a sloped roof would be what we think a reasonable height that will allow homeowners, again, more flexibility and also lower the cost of construction. So thank you for your consideration and appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coe. Next on the list, Ms. Jones.
Okay, the next person on the list is Robinson Marcus, who is also with the Evanston Development Cooperative.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good evening to members of the Planning Commission, city staff, and Evanston residents. My name is Robinson, or Robbie Marcus. I live near Lincoln Elementary School, and I'm a co-founder and the vice president of the Evanston Development Cooperative. I want to echo Dick and thank city staff for everything they're doing on this initiative, because other municipalities in the Chicagoland area ask us, how is Evanston doing this? This is really interesting, and so I'd like to begin this discussion by talking about the connection between race and exclusionary zoning in American municipal governments as a way to frame this policy. As Richard Rothstein writes in The Color of Law about the city of St. Louis, and I quote, "If a neighborhood was covered with single-family houses with deeds that prohibited African-American occupancy, this was taken into consideration at Plan Commission meetings and made it almost certain that the neighborhood would be zoned first residential, prohibiting future construction of anything but single-family units and helping to preserve its all-white character." Now, given that most of Evanston's single-family districts were adopted in 1921, I hope we can see why our discussion today to work towards a zoning code that does not discriminate based on race or income is critical for our community. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, are a small step towards socioeconomically and racially diverse neighborhoods. More specifically, the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley published a study on the relationship between local government's ADU ordinances and the number of permits issued across a series of municipalities. And they found that municipalities with more flexible and less restrictive ordinances were more likely to see an increase in ADU permits. Particularly, they found a strong relationship between waiving off-street parking requirements and ADU applications. And we agree with the idea of considering whether our off-street parking requirements for ADUs and single-family dwellings could be reduced in Evanston. Studies find that ADU households own half the national average of vehicles per household, and further, a reduction in off-street parking supports ground-level accessible units for aging or disabled residents. We also agree with the proposal to legalize internal or attached units. These units often have a lower cost of construction and detached new construction ADUs above a garage. So this policy can help make these housing options more accessible to Evanston property owners across the income spectrum. And as for the number of ADUs per lot, we think it may be worth considering the benefits of allowing one attached ADU and one detached ADU per lot. Cities bigger and smaller than Evanston, from Seattle to Fayetteville, Arkansas, to a town called Troutdale, Oregon, with 17,000 people, have allowed this. And we believe that it could provide residents with more options to remain in their neighborhoods and community as their needs change. And finally, in regards to fire sprinklers, we found that the most common policy in other cities is to exempt a detached ADU from requiring fire sprinklers if their main home does not have existing sprinklers. Attached ADUs below a certain square footage limit also tend to exempt, while garage conversions and larger attached ADU bump outs often require a sprinkler addition. And we think these policies could apply well in Evanston. Thank you to city staff for driving this work forward with thought and care, and thank you to the Plan Commission for taking the time to consider this policy issue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. It looks like Tracy Folse is actually in the meeting right now. I don't know if-
I'm not seeing. Oh, there's a second page now.
Okay,
Oh, there's
there she
Tracy.
is.
Hi, Tracy. You're on mute still, so why don't you take yourself off mute? Hello.
Hello. Sorry that I'm a little late.
No worries.
I just wanted to say that I'm excited to see the direction that the city is moving towards being more flexible in terms of ADUs, and I'd like to see that continue to support perhaps other ways of approaching it. In my own family, we're thinking about aging parents and how to simultaneously keep them safe and close, but not too close. So, I mean, really. So the one thing that I find disconcerting is the parking question, and that there has to be additional parking in order to have those units. And if you have an elderly parent, like my mother-in-law, for example, doesn't drive, and so and doesn't have a vehicle, so there would be no need for her to have a parking space. And so I'm not sure how exactly that would be resolved, but I think that requirement actually makes it unnecessarily difficult, and I'd like that part to be reconsidered. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The last person on my list is Sue Lowbach.
All right. Oh, there we
Hello,
go.
everybody. I'm Sue Lolbach. I work at Connections for the Homeless and head up a coalition called Joining Forces for Affordable Housing. We advocate for more affordable housing because the main thing that everybody who comes to Connections has in common with everyone else that comes to Connections is that they can't afford the housing that's available to them. We are very interested in watching what's happening with ADUs and the coach houses. Our primary interest is in how they can become affordable. And therefore, we're very interested in the zoning. And we're interested in the zoning beyond just ADUs as well. There's been a lot of people around town talking about the budget being a moral document. Well, we feel very strongly that the zoning code is also a moral document, and that there needs to be a complete review of the zoning code to ensure that not only does it preserve property values and the character of the community,
Ms.
but that it
Lolbach?
also provides sustainable homes. Yes? Can you
I'm
hear
sorry, you cut out for a second. It may have been on my end. I just wanted to make
Okay,
sure.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to wrap it up, I wanted to say that we're very happy that you're doing this review of the ADU, all of the code related to ADUs. We know that the changes you make probably will not make the ADUs affordable. However, the way the ordinances are right now, they are certainly increasing the cost. And so by changing these ordinances, you're going to be increasing the flexibility of how people can use their land, and that's going to be necessary in order to come up with affordability solutions. So we're very excited that you're doing this, and we hope, as Tracy said, that this is just a first step and that we'll be looking at other types of ordinances in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and so Ms. Jones, that was Ms. Lobach was the last.
Yes, that was the last person that signed up ahead of time.
Okay. Is there anyone else on the call that would like to provide any comments with respect to this matter? If so, take yourself off mute and let us know. All right, doesn't sound like it, so we can move on to commission discussion. So in our packet, there are the items where staff was seeking guidance from the commission were highlighted. Nevertheless, I think we should just go down the list, and if someone has a comment with respect to something that wasn't highlighted, we can discuss. And just going down the list, I think will probably be the most efficient way of addressing this.
Can I just ask a
please.
couple of questions, or is this not the right time?
Yeah, please.
I just wondered, has there ever been a survey of the accessory dwelling units that exist and what the characteristics are of them, how high they are, how large, all that of existing?
It's a good question, Commissioner Halleck. I don't know that we have anything comprehensive. At times we tried to use aerials and had some other staff and interns look at that to try to figure out where the accessory dwelling units are, but I don't know that we have a comprehensive look. I would say traditionally they're in some of our older neighborhoods and areas where the coach houses have been, and many that were barns originally, and then currently being used for housing.
Mm-hmm. The other question I had, and I just didn't see it on the list of qualifications for accessory unit, does lot coverage play into this, or is that on the list?
It is one of the items on the list.
It is, okay. I'm sorry.
Currently, we're sort of thinking of just having the regular lot coverage requirement for the underlying zoning district.
Okay.
It's item E is where we showed that there, but we.
Okay, sorry.
And the other consideration there, as Mr. Coe brought up, was looking at removing the requirement for open parking counting towards building lot coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with respect to the definition of a dwelling unit, the idea would be adding an internal ADU in addition to what we've previously just called a coach house. I actually have a question with respect to that, and it's sort of tertiary to this discussion. But Ms. Jones or Mr. Mangum, do you know whether the inclusion of an ADU on a lot from the assessor's perspective, does that make it a multifamily home? Because for the way we're looking at this, the city of Evanston would still consider it a single family, but with an ADU. They wouldn't consider it a 2-unit property. Since we're talking about including an internal ADU, there's a very small distinction between an internal ADU and a 2-unit building, at least from the assessor's perspective. And I'm wondering if there's any consideration to how that would affect the assessor's look at any of our properties.
It's a good question. I can take a look at that while we're talking and come back. I know that recent communication from the Economic Development Cooperative, and so, you know, if they have something to add, could be time now as well. I know that the Cook County Assessor is looking into if there's an ADU that would be income restricted or would be affordable and assessing at a different rate. I believe they're also looking at different codes, but I'm not positive whether a different code already exists for a single family property that has an ADU.
Thank you.
If it's okay if I add one item. I currently know, Commissioner Isaac, that current detached coach houses in Evanston are either classified in Cook County as 2-02 or 2-03, which, depending on the size, are small one-story.
Single family homes. Yeah.
I actually don't know how an attached ADU would affect the classification.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So the construction, it looks like you mentioned that the city of Chicago is going to require internal ADUs to be constructed only within buildings that were constructed in the last 20 years. I presume that that's not going to be the case in Evanston.
We haven't anticipated that as a regulation, but they'll provide that information of what Chicago's doing.
And commissioners, just you know, jump in on any of these items. B was the number of units, and we heard some a comment from, I believe, Mr. Coe, saying that he would hope that there would be more than one ADU allowed per zoning lot. Do the commissioners have any thoughts on that? Okay, well, I can just jump in and say, you know, I think at this time, limiting a property to one ADU is probably the more appropriate approach. And, you know, seeing where we are in a few years, and, you know, what the, you know, how this goes would inform our decision on whether to allow, you know, one internal and one external. But that's, you know, obviously just my opinion on the matter.
I would agree with that. I think that's a good approach.
Okay, minimum lot size, we're not touching that. Maximum ADU size. Any thoughts on that?
Well, 1,000 square feet was suggested. That makes sense to me because it's, I mean, and actually that's a fairly large unit. It's not huge. It's not too small. But what it signifies is one unit, you know, one dwelling unit. If it gets much larger than that, I think it could be easily divided into 2 units. So it seems like the right kind of the sweet spot number to me.
1,000 square feet.
Yeah. Yep.
And then as far as minimum size, I presume that we're just looking at saying that, you know, whatever, you know, there's obviously a minimum size that you need to fit everything you need to have in order to have a living unit. And that's probably, I'm not an architect here, but I would imagine it's probably about 350 square feet, and that would be pretty small. But Ms. Jones or Mr. Mangum, we're not suggesting a minimum ADU size, are we?
Not directly. Obviously, the building code and property standards code would dictate some of those items. The other regulation that some ordinances have is a relational size of the ADU to the principal unit. So some would be on the most expansive would just be to have the ADU be smaller than the square footage of the principal unit. Some say a certain percentage, so 60%, 25%, 75% of the size of the house or the principal unit.
So let me ask you about the maximum size here. I presume that building code will require two means of ingress and egress, and if you have an internal ADU, later on we're going to see that there basically needs to be a separate entrance, and if it's external, it needs to be it can't be on the front of the house. If someone has a property where their basement is, let's say, 1,800 square feet, by limiting the maximum size of the ADU, would we be potentially adding additional expense, as opposed to the property owner kind of sectioning off their utilities and maybe a little storage area in their basement, but then having to include more walls or maybe a walkway to another existing doorway, by having a maximum size? Is that is there potential for an unintended consequence of making it more cost prohibitive? Hello?
The commissioners jump in however they want, but I could see commission maybe thinking through whether there should be different requirements for a detached versus an attached or internal. Whereas if someone has, for example, a 3,000 square foot house with 2 levels above, 2,000 foot levels above ground and 1,000 foot level below ground, and you restricted it to 600 square feet, then, restricting the size of that basement, and chopping that up to make sure that it's not 1,000 square feet, as Commissioner Isaac or Chair Isaac said, could be an expense. So maybe that would be a different circumstance, a different requirement for an internal existing than for new construction, where there's obviously a lot more ability to limit the size of it.
Sure. Okay. All right. Let's see. There's lot coverage, which.
Well, if I could,
Please.
Sharon, I just had an additional question on the maximum ADU size issue. I mean, obviously the cities that are mentioned in the background materials are kind of all over the place. 700, 800, 900, 1,000 has been floated as a reasonable. What's the kind of methodology or the science or the logic behind choosing any? Do we know what led to Lake Park Forest choosing 800 and South Elgin 900 and Wilmette having 25% of whatever? Or is it just the commissioners or the city at that time felt, that kind of feels about right? Is that kind of the methodology here? It feels about right, or is there a more, for lack of a better word, scientific, kind of rational lens that we can use that to come up with a maximum ADU size number?
Taking back for a second what I said about the 1,000 square feet, maybe we should talk about who are these for? Are they for families? Are there families with, 3 kids? Who are they for? Or are we saying they're mostly for single people and couples? Because that really determines what the appropriate unit size is, I think. That's one way of looking at it, at least.
And I guess
for 1,000 square feet. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
No, I'm saying, and I guess another way to look at it in addition to that would be, in the real estate market, at what size point does it no longer become affordable and becomes now non-affordable? In other words, once it reaches a certain size, you're really defeating the purpose of providing affordable housing versus just adding more non-affordable stock into the market.
For 1,000 square feet, I think you can pretty much get like a two-bedroom apartment in a 1,000 square feet, right? I mean, that's one of the new ones.
That's what I was thinking. A two-bedroom apartment would be a couple and maybe one or two kids could live in that in 1,000 square feet. That's where I came up with. That's why I thought the 1,000 was appropriate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yard requirements. There doesn't seem to be any special yard requirements, so we're just gonna underlying zoning is gonna control. Maximum height is a highlighted item, and right now we're looking at 20 feet for a flat roof and 28 feet for or up to 28 feet for slope roofs, but there needed to be additional setbacks. I believe I think in here it had mentioned that that we had suggested that an external ADU not be taller than the main house, and I believe the city council kept that restriction out of the ordinance that was passed. So is there any thoughts on this? I know that when we were talking about the increased height or the potential for increased height, that I believe it was like 1 foot of increased height for every additional foot of side yard that an ADU was going to have, and my recollection is that was going to make it very hard for pretty much anyone to really take advantage of that increased height. Am I summarizing that correctly, Mr. Mingham?
That is one of the concerns. I think of the additional height would be allowed, and it just depends on what the lot width is in a lot of cases. There isn't a lot of room to play with for an external or detached ADU, particularly depending on the amount of parking that's required, the number of cars that would be housed if it were associated with a coach house.
My opinion is I'm not sure that setback, when you're talking about a building that is 10 or 20 feet, that's 2 stories, flat roof, 20 feet, that's 2 stories. I'm not sure what the side yard setback has to do with that. I mean, that's such a small building. Maybe I don't understand, but to me, they're not connected. To me, it shouldn't be higher than the principal house, and it shouldn't be higher than 2 stories. And typically, 10 foot per floor is what you allow. So plus the sloped roof, would add. But I just don't understand the connection to the setbacks.
I think the issue is getting that previously an accessory structure was required to be less than or 20 feet or less, and that since we're talking about putting up since there's discussion of a sloped roof and having 2 stories, if someone wanted a sloped roof, the idea was to give them the ability to have that, but they needed to give more setback.
And that's what I'm saying doesn't connect for me. I don't see having a sloped roof. Having a sloped roof to me is about style, consistency with the neighborhood and maybe the principal building, but it doesn't have anything to do with setbacks in my opinion.
From my recollection of this, when we talked about it in January, it was that the height was useful, that we're increasing it, but it almost wasn't doing enough because it still was hard to build. And with the side setbacks, and I think the parking requirement is also really integral to this. And I know that's the next one down, but because most people are now having to have their ground floor be parking, then they're only really allowing to have livable on the second floor. So I think that part is also pretty
Mhm.
important. And maybe the setback is like a standard setback no matter what the height is. I mean, I'm understanding Commissioner Halleck's point.
Within a range,
Yeah,
within a height range.
yeah.
Maybe the answer is because at 28 feet, you could potentially do 2.5 stories, right? If it's a sloped roof, and maybe you're increasing that. So maybe having a, increasing the 20 feet of a without increasing the height limitation, the height restriction, removing the additional setback, but making it clear that an accessory structure can't be more than 2 stories. And so, stylistically, you can construct it how you want, but there shouldn't be 2 stories, or there shouldn't be like a mezzanine within the structure, and just keeping it to it's a 2-story structure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's just an idea.
That makes sense.
Okay, let's see. For off-street parking, so I think we're talking about not requiring parking for ADUs, and I'm wondering, should there be a distinction between properties that have the parking that is currently required under zoning versus there might be a property that doesn't provide parking, that is maybe it doesn't have access to an alley, has a backyard, and so it doesn't provide any of the parking for its existing its existing structure. Should that property be treated the same as one that that doesn't, right? That doesn't.
So the main structure should definitely, and has to meet the parking requirements before you waive any parking requirements for the ADU.
Just a thought. I mean,
Yeah,
that does put a restriction out there that will make it hard for some property owners who have that situation. But I don't know. That's just one thing that I thought of, that like it's a at that point you have a non-conforming property, and you're effectively increasing the non-conformance, but it wouldn't be increasing the non-conformance unless you make it clear in the zoning code. Any ideas or thoughts? Other thoughts with respect to off-street parking?
Well, the comment that was brought up about allowing it to be outside and to waive the building lot in place of that, I think is an interesting one. I mean, in concept, I like it, but I also don't want to create more impervious surfaces outside, which are kind of like then starting to steamroll that. I would rather just get rid of the requirement altogether. Is probably my thinking, because I'm thinking it really is restricting ADUs from happening with the parking requirement.
So your suggestion would be to remove the like the 200 square foot hit on building lot coverage for every required parking spot?
I was saying there that was suggested today about taking that off from the building lot coverage. That if you do that, once you start to waive that, then it would encourage more people to use their backyards for parking outside, and that in doing that, you're reducing the amount of green space in your backyard. So I think that could just lead to a slippery slope once we start to agree to that.
The next item was design standards. And I know it's not highlighted, but I thought it was interesting that the idea is to have only one pedestrian entrance to the structure. And one thing I'd point out is that there are currently currently properties, let's say like a two flat, that has two pedestrian entrances on the front, but the owner could make the basement an ADU, and so maybe maybe that language needs to be massaged a little bit, just to make it clear that the idea is that you're not adding one for the ADU. And then exterior stairs should be located on the side or rear of the principal building. The only thing I'd point out is that we may need to consider corner lots, and so if it's on the side, are we making a second front to the property? It's probably okay, but just something for staff to consider before they bring their proposal to the board. I'm going to skip alterations in ownership and occupancy, and move on to separation from principal structure, detached ADU. I guess staff's idea is to reduce the distance between the principal and accessory structure from 10 feet to 5 feet. Are there any thoughts on that from the commissioners?
I think 5 feet is the minimum just for light and air in most light and air in most codes. That is really tight. And I don't think that feels like Evanston, frankly. So
Yeah,
it should be bigger.
I agree with that. I feel like 5 feet is too close. I think 10 feet feels better.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion with respect to this item? I actually had a question. There was a mention of fire sprinklers, and I know that doesn't fall within zoning, but is there a fire sprinkler requirement for new construction residential, that's like not multifamily?
Currently, there is for a single family home, or currently for an ADU or coach house, there would be a requirement.
So a new construction single family home in Evanston, there's a fire sprinkler requirement?
That's correct.
Okay. I was not aware of that.
So that is something
I'm not either.
I think it was Robbie brought up. There's a state requirement that exempts some of that sprinklering in California and some other cities that have requirements associated with that.
Does it really make sense? Does it really make sense for 1,000 square foot building to be sprinklered? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like there should be a minimum size on that requirement.
Right.
I feel like I mean, my limited knowledge about fire sprinklers is that they cost a lot to install, and
Yeah.
even with something that's relatively small, small ADU, if we're talking about making this attainable and affordable, that flies in the face of that.
I
now,
totally
obviously,
agree. They're expensive, and this could make the unit unaffordable just with that one requirement.
And so obviously you can't, we shouldn't be sacrificing safety for that, but nevertheless, I would say it's probably 95% of single family homes and two flats within the city of Evanston right now do not have fire sprinklers. And so, having that being a requirement would seem to be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve. But again, that's not really within our purview. But we've said our piece at least.
If I can interject and maybe
Please.
Scott come in without having the fire department here to fully confirm. I know for some of the commercial properties we've had that come before DAPR, where they may not be able to put in a sprinkler system, the fire department does have a process for an alternative plan for fire protection. So that'd be something that a homeowner might want to work with the fire department specifically with, to see if they need to have maybe fire extinguishers or maybe some
Smoke
kind
detectors.
of retardant materials with what's actually in the home. So, I mean, there are probably some alternatives to full sprinklers.
That's good to know. The remaining issue there would be, is that process costly for getting that information and getting the exemption from the fire department? Would that in itself be prohibitive? I know we talk about our planned development process here in Evanston can be prohibitive to some developers. We don't want to create a process for our own residents and property owners that would do the same. Any other comments or discussion items for this item?
Just going to bring up to the commission. I think we did get some good discussion on the parking requirements for the accessory dwelling units. I did want to bring up that the city of Chicago, through their draft ordinance, is actually looking to change the parking requirement for single-family dwellings from 2 parking spaces required per single-family house to 1 space per single-family house. And that would be just a citywide change, whether there's an ADU or not. So I know we, often look at Chicago, although we have some different characteristics, but I wanted to see if the commission had any thoughts on that requirement.
So right now, it's 2 spaces for, or is it 2 spaces or 1.5 for a single family home in Evanston?
2 for a single family home.
Okay, and then if it's a 2 unit, it's 1.5. There's like one additional space required.
I believe so.
Okay, and so would the idea be to reduce across the board the parking requirement in the city of Evanston and exempt ADUs from parking?
That would be the idea. That would provide the most flexibility, but
Well, then that means that someone with a house, that existing house with 2 car parking could make that additional parking space something else, and then reduce their parking to 1 space and add an ADU. That doesn't make sense to me. So what I'm thinking is that if the requirement is 2 parking spaces, then if they want to add an ADU, they should not be allowed to reduce the the parking from 2 to
Mhm.
1. It should stay if they add an ADU.
Well, I think what Mr. Mangum's saying is that at least mentioning that the city of Chicago, not related to ADUs, is reducing their
understand.
parking requirement, and so that would be, I guess, a separate discussion for our zoning code. But in the context of what we're discussing, yeah, you're right. It would be like I guess a double whammy.
Double dip.
Right. I wouldn't be in favor, personally, I wouldn't be in favor of reducing it in Evanston from 2 to 1. I would not.
That's not the question, moron.
Oh, hello? Is that another commissioner? All right. All right. The next item on our agenda is.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just have a question. So the staff is really just looking to hear the discussion, or I guess, are you looking for the consensus of the meeting? 1,000 for the maximum ADU size, blah, blah, or just to hear what we. Because the thoughts were kind of all over the board on some of the issues. I'm not sure how clear guidance we were on some of the issues. I think we were able to provide a little bit more clarity in terms of set consensus of the group or the sense of the meeting.
It's a good point, Mr. Mangum. Ms. Jones, do you feel satisfied with the discussion? Would you like clarification on anything?
I just kind of, if I were in their shoes, I'd
bring something back. You'll still have to vote on it when we bring it back as a text amendment, whether that's at the next meeting in August. For some of the items, maybe where there wasn't a singular number, we could present a couple options.
Or the commissioners feel that we have had sufficient consensus on the orange highlighted items, that we could provide more concrete numbers or concepts for the items that have been highlighted in orange.
I mean, I personally feel comfortable with what we've discussed, and with the understanding that this was a discussion, and that even if it appears that we had consensus today on an item, the commission could go completely in a different direction once we're looking at something concrete. We promise not to try to do that, Mr. Mangum, but nevertheless, that's where we are.
I'll just raise that I think this is a really good time to bring this up. I think a lot of people really would love to have an extra place to live in their backyards or something like that. So this could really be useful if it can help ease the process.
Yep. Okay. Next item is revisions to the Plan Commission's administrative rules and procedures. And Ms. Jones and Mr. Mangum, correct me if I'm wrong, but on this item as well, for our rules, this is only under discussion because this has not been presented to us with enough time pursuant to our rules, so that we're gonna review it today. We're gonna discuss it, and it will be something that we can vote on at our next meeting. Is that an accurate summary? Someone's got to go off mute. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So going through this, the changes here.
Chair Isaac, I have.
Oh, sorry. You have a little.
A very brief slide that might just kind of help us.
Awesome.
Step through. Okay. right, so generally speaking, we've got a few key parts that we're trying to get some feedback on today. The first is being really minor corrective edits to like the language, correcting code section numbers that we noticed aren't consistent throughout. We also want to make sure we have some consistency throughout the document with regards to time allotted for comments. We have a couple of sections that weren't matching up. We also want clarification on the process for requesting continuances. We are also looking for feedback on just some minor updates regarding submitting materials to staff and to the commission for presentation during some of our public hearings and during those meetings. And then just some really minor updates regarding the commissioner responsibilities if they happen to be absent for a portion of a public hearing for a particular agenda item. So generally speaking, those are the 5 major points that we've got some corrections for today. Don't know if you just pull up the document, go through.
Why don't you leave the this slide up, and we can just go down the line. So the minor corrective edits to language, code section numbers, etc. That's obviously not going to be. I don't think any commissioners, and commissioners correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're going to have any issues with that. That's good work on your part. The consistency throughout the document with respect to time allotted for comments. It looks like we're making it clear that individual citizens shall have 2 minutes, and comments about a group of citizens, someone speaking on behalf of an organization or a group of citizens would not exceed 10 minutes. So it looks like we're reducing from 3 to 2 for individuals, and for organizations from 5 to 10. And so, are there any comments or issues from the commission with respect to those changes? Because I do feel like we've been operating with either 2 or 3 minutes on individuals, and my recollection is that at least when I was keeping time, that it's very rare for someone to actually go over 2 minutes. And then for groups, it seems to me that I don't even remember someone using up 10 minutes on that. So that's 10 minutes seems more than enough for groups, and for individuals it's probably not enough for a few people, but for the vast majority, 2 minutes would be more than enough.
I'm not sure why 10 minutes for a group, because the group is represented by a person, right? There isn't, 5 people speaking, correct? If it is, and if a person representing a group, I could see maybe giving them a little longer, like 5 minutes, but 10 minutes for an individual representing a group seems ridiculously long.
Yeah. Where did the 10 minutes come from? Is it in any other meetings?
I think it's kind of dependent on the meeting. I think there's actually a different section I'm scrolling through now that listed 10 minutes. It's been fairly flexible during meetings in practice. So it's kind of if there's an abundance of information that needs to be presented, and it's a person or a couple of people that are representing a very large group, they may have a little bit extra time that's allotted for them. Or if there are a lot of people who are wishing to speak, we try to keep the information and the presentations more concise. So we might stick to a shorter time period. But I think that the 10 minutes for a group is just, if we have a case where someone requested a continuance and they actually have information that they're presenting that they want to rebut testimony that was given before, that may take a little bit more than 5 minutes. So for instances like that, that's essentially, I think, where that came from.
Maybe
So I-
that, maybe that extra time should be associated with continuances and not just generally.
You know, it's easy for someone to at the beginning ask for more time, and we can take a quick vote and give them more time. You know, if we deem it appropriate. But I think I agree that 10 minutes is probably, if we give it across the board, that could, you know, just really hamstring our ability to address topics. So I think I agree with what's being said, that, you know, maybe 10 minutes is a little too long. All right, let's see. Oh, the next item is clarification on the process for requesting continuances. Okay, so the change there is removing the 500 feet versus 1,000 feet, and it's basically anyone within 1,000 feet for any item that we're dealing with can request a continuance, and it's making clear that it needs to be a written request, that the request should state what portions of the applicant's testimony that they're going to be rebutting. So I think this addresses a lot of applicants' concerns that when a request is made, that they want to know what's the basis, and so this would provide a requirement to provide that basis. I don't see any issue with that change. That it seems to me that's only appropriate, especially when applicants have spent a lot of time and effort coming before the Plan Commission, and you know, they can as well prepare themselves for whatever counter argument is made at the next meeting. The one issue that I have is the written request, and I think continuing to make it a written request doesn't address the issues we've dealt with in our own residents who are at the meeting. They cannot present the written request until the applicant has made his or her case, and now we're asking them to have something in writing, which, you know, a lot of times they don't, and we get requests written, you know, scribbled on a piece of paper or a napkin. You know, I'm wondering, does it need to be written? Like, can we just say that, you know, a person needs to, you know, stand up and, you know, give his or her name and the reason for their request, and that, you know, a statement that they'll be at the next meeting to rebut the testimony? I mean, what are your thoughts, commissioners?
One thing I was going to raise on this, just to sidestep this for a second, was it doesn't clearly say when they have to do their continuance in the meeting, and I would think it would make sense if we say it needs to be at a certain time, and after that time it's kind of like you void it, because we sometimes have seen it kind of happen right at the last second, right before we're going to vote. And is it possible to change it to be like after they give their test, who's ever presenting their case, you need to do it at that time rather than at some point while everyone's kind of just discussing and debating?
Along those same lines, I was wondering, and I understand the purposes to right now, it's to allow them to request a continuance after the applicant has made the presentation. But it seems to me that the reality is that someone that's going to request a continuance, the presentation is irrelevant. That they know they're going to, if they know that they can do it, they can do it even before the applicant makes the presentation. So I don't want to go too far against the current rules, but it seems really an inconvenience, to say the least, to have all these, in a controversial case, all these people show up for a meeting and then it gets continued. So they sit through the whole presentation and then nothing, and then they have to come back another time. So I guess and this probably sounds too radical, but is it possible that the continuances be requested before the presentation or not?
I was thinking the same thing, Commissioner Halleck, but I was thinking maybe it's part of it is like having it be part of the public record once they've presented, then the project's like on the books kind of thing. And if you do it before it's presented, will the public feel like they're part of the process? And they just get an email saying it's been continued.
The public gets a notice. So they know what the presentation essentially is about. So I would think that a lot of people say, well, we didn't have enough time to prepare, and well, they know that before the meeting. And
I guess what they wouldn't know is exactly what portion. Well, they may know, but they haven't heard the presentation yet, so there's still some doubt as to what portion. In advance, they would have to then indicate what portion they intend to rebut, but they haven't actually heard it yet. They generally know what the guys.
And what you're discounting in the process here is that this is after the I believe it's after, and if it isn't, it should be. It should be after the question and it should be after the question and answer section, right? So it should be after question and answer and before public comment, because there's plenty of times where questions from either the commission or the public prior to public comment have raised issues, and there's someone invariably someone in the audience that says, wait a minute, you mean that? Like, I didn't know that, and now they have something that they really want to discuss that they weren't aware of from having looked at the packet.
Yeah.
And Chair Isaac, to that point, currently in the rules, the time period to request continuance is after the petition's presentation, but prior to cross-examination, so prior to questions.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So
And the city code actually does.
It does say that.
Says evidence to rebut testimony that's given by the applicant. So
Okay.
the applicant has presented their information, their project, their whatever they are presenting.
But their answers are also testimony, right? Anything they say in the meeting is part of their testimony. Now, a closing argument after public comment, I think we can sort of say that there shouldn't be anything in there that should be rebutted. It's very unlikely there would be rebuttable evidence in there, but I like the idea of having of it being after question and answer, because I think the question and answer section from the public is where they can elicit some testimony, where they can say, well, I'll get something or someone in here to rebut that.
Do they have to state exactly what they want to rebut, or they just?
The new language is saying such request shall state what portions of the applicant's testimony for which rebuttable evidence will be presented.
I see it. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And one other thing, Ms. Jones and Mr. Mangum, is that I think it makes sense to put in this section that to put into law what we usually do, which is allow people to allow people to provide comments if they're there and they don't plan on coming to the next meeting. You know, if that's our normal, if that's our, you know, how we normally operate, let's just make it part of the rules so that there's no question as to what, you know, what we're doing here, and that you know, at the continuance, you know, there'll be rebuttal testimony with respect to the items that are you know, that were, you know, noticed up by the resident, and that after that, the applicant can, you know, respond, and then we just move straight to public comment. You know, I know it's probably making this section a little, you know, bigger than it currently is, but since this is the one section that really ends up being an issue during our meetings, I think it makes sense to really, you know, make it read how it's actually put into practice.
On your comment, Chair Isaac, about having it written, I understand your point, and it does seem kind of funny when everyone's just like scrambling to write something. I would think that it's a legal process to have it written. I'm wondering if we usually give a like little reminding people that they can do a continuance when the meeting starts. I mean, maybe we need to make sure that happens in every meeting, right when the meeting starts. Like, this is the process for a continuance, so people aren't so frazzled by the idea.
Yeah.
Well,
it seems like people always are like, what?
You know, the only, you know, functional issue is that question and comments end, and I say, okay, you know, does anyone have a request for a continuance? And ultimately, even if they're warned ahead of time,
yeah,
that's when they're going to write it. So if we're going to take a 2-minute or a 5-minute break after the question and comment section, and so that someone isn't completely scrambling, right? Like we don't want our own neighbors and, you know, community members to feel unfairly, you know, to feel that they're being treated unfairly, and that like this request for a continuance is not real, right? It's real.
Mm-hmm.
It's something they can do, and I think that the process should be, I mean, it shouldn't be completely lax, right? That's why we're putting in the requirement that they need to state why they want a continuance, but it shouldn't be so onerous that it's not achievable.
Mm-hmm.
But that's this stating why they want a continuance very specifically is why I kind of like the written part, because it forces them to say, oh, I just, you know, I don't want a continuance because my friends aren't here, or, you know, it forces them, and we review their request, and it has to be specific.
But I mean, how is them verbally stating it any different, right? Like,
okay, well, I guess if it can go in the record, then and then we hold them to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be in the minutes. Now, you know, before the next meeting, we'll know exactly what we're dealing with.
Okay.
That's true.
I think there was a suggestion that we possibly create a form that is very explicit.
That's a good idea.
Especially probably ahead of time, since we've got a lot of information that's presented within the packets. If there is someone that feels that there's some information that's maybe within that packet that they don't feel is honest or is incorrect or misleading, that they can very specifically pinpoint that information. And it'll be easy to just basically just fill in a form and fill in the blanks that way.
If they find something in the packet that they disagree with and they want to dispute and they want a continuance to do that, can they then ask for a continuance before the presentation? Before everybody shows up thinking that there's going to be a vote? Is that possible? Can you ask for a continuance before the presentation if you find something in the packet?
Yeah, I would be hesitant to agree to allow that to happen, only because you could get 3 or 4 different requests for continuance. Okay, and if we're saying that someone wants to rebut the testimony, okay, there could be different aspects of the testimony, and so if you get someone asking for continuance before the applicant has presented and before question and answer, then
yeah,
on one topic, then you're sort of blocking that opportunity for all the other topics.
Yep. I just think that this continuance idea is abused most of the time, and but I understand your point very well. So,
And there's a comment in the chat about maybe having a form, pre-printed form that we have, that perhaps you could hand out at the beginning of the meetings if you're thinking of be asking for a continuance. Here's the form you got to fill out, and that it makes it a little easier so they're not scrambling trying to jot something down.
It just needs to be really specific that they need to present evidence. Because I think a lot of people see it in their head, they're just delaying it.
right.
Right. The form focuses the mind.
Yeah,
To your point, Mr. Halleck, in terms of having some written document.
right.
Okay,
I just had a quick question. Maybe I'm misreading it. We're striking out the 500 feet in case of map amendments. Does that mean that now it's 1,000 feet for map amendments, or you can't do continuances for map amendments?
Yeah, actually, it's a good point, Commissioner Halleck. Commissioner Hugo, thanks for bringing that up. So this is to be consistent with the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance currently allows for requests for continuance for planned developments and unique uses, but not for amendments.
Okay.
There is a separate process in the zoning ordinance for map amendments, where property owners within that 500 feet may submit a petition. And if I think it's over 30% submit that petition, it triggers a supermajority vote at City Council, 7 or 9. So there's another process already identified that allows for opposition to map amendments.
Thank you.
all right, then what's the next? I think it was a number of business days that the applicant has to bring, has to provide the information to the commission. It's currently 4, and we're making it 6 business days. That doesn't seem to be.
On this one, sometimes in the presentation, they'll include things that are new that aren't in the packet.
Yeah, that's true.
So what's the rules with that? And they're technically not supposed to do that, I would assume, right?
Well, for this particular change, this is for when we have a significant amount of information and someone knows that they have some information that they want the commission to look at ahead of time, especially if they want it to be in the packet that is sent out to you as the commissioners. This would pretty much just make it so that we aren't getting something at 4 o'clock on Friday that is to go out in the packet that goes out at 5 p.m. that same day. We do sometimes get information after that particular time frame. This isn't necessarily a hard deadline, but if it's going to be something that is presented ahead of time, that we have commissioners have enough time to look at and review, then we stick to what we're proposing here. When we do get something that's presented to us afterwards, we still end up, as you've noticed before, I'll print that out, put it on the dais or send it through email, and then post it on the city's website if it's a significant change or something
Okay.
that's been left out before. So, I mean, there are steps that we take to make sure the information is properly presented and posted, but we, as much as possible, want to have the information ahead of time so that gives pretty much everyone, commissioners and members of the public, to actually look and pay attention and figure out questions, figure out if they want to request a continuance. So yeah, that's where that
Hey, Scott,
is coming from.
could you bring me the ice pack?
All right. Are there any other points in the revision to the rules and procedures that we need to discuss, Megan? You're on mute, Megan.
I think that is just about it. I think the only other change was the commissioner's responsibilities if you happen to be absent for part of the or all of the public hearing for a particular agenda item. It's basically just stating that you have watched the video for that particular item and reviewed the minutes.
Okay.
So that you're able to vote on that item.
That seems only fair. Okay. So the next item is election of chair and vice chair. And I think since we only have 5 commissioners and only 4 present, I think we're gonna push this to the next meeting. But Ms. Jones or Mr. Mangum, I think the city council had looked at this and decided that they wanted us to select our own chair and vice chair versus having the mayor select them.
Correct.
Okay. So if any of you commissioners are interested in being chair or vice chair for the next 6 months before the next election, say something today, or plan on putting your hat in the ring at the next meeting before you get roped in unwillingly. With that, are there any comments from the public on any issues before the Plan Commission? All right, hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Commissioner Halleck will give Draper the second.
Second.
And again, this is going to be by roll call vote. Ms. Jones? Oh, you're on mute again.
Commissioner Draper,
Yes.
Commissioner Halleck,
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo,
Yes.
Chair Isaac.
Yes. Okay, with that, the meeting of the Evanston Plan Commission on July 8th, 2020 is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.